The rancher saw an Apache fugitive bathing in the river, and her beauty took his breath away. John was a man shaped by the land he lived on. The wide, open plains of Arizona had been his home for as long as he could remember. Rolling hills stretched for miles, covered with golden grasses that danced in the wind, and the occasional clusters of juniper and mesquite trees broke the monotony of the horizon. The air was dry, sometimes harsh, but it carried a certain calmness that John had come to love. Life on the ranch was not easy, but it was honest. Each day brought a rhythm, feeding the cattle, mending broken fences, checking water troughs, and walking the dusty trails that threaded through his property. From a young age, John had known this land intimately. He knew every bend in the river, every hidden path in the hills, every spot where the soil was rich and where it was poor. He could tell which cattle were sick just by the way they moved, and knew when a storm was coming before the clouds even darkened the sky. But despite this deep connection with his surroundings, there was a part of him that felt incomplete. The ranch was quiet, too quiet sometimes. Most of his neighbors lived miles away, and the few times he visited the nearest town, he felt like an outsider, a man tied too tightly to the earth to fit comfortably in the small community of shops and taverns. One morning, as the sun rose in a burst of gold and pink, John walked along the river that cut across his property. The river was a lifeline in this dry land, a place where the cattle drank and where he sometimes went to think. He liked the early mornings best, when the world was still waking up and the only sounds were the rustle of grasses and the songs of distant birds. His boots pressed into the soft earth along the bank, leaving deep impressions that the gentle river breeze seemed to almost caress. As he walked, he noticed something unusual. The mud along the riverbank was disturbed, with footprints leading toward the water. They were not the tracks of his cattle or the usual deer and rabbits he saw from time to time. These prints were human, barefoot, careful, almost deliberate. John paused, squinting at them. Something about the footprints made his heart beat faster. In all his years on the land, he had learned to recognize danger, and yet these prints held a strange promise of curiosity and unease. He followed the trail slowly, keeping to the shade of the riverbank trees, careful not to make a sound. The footprints led to a bend in the river where the water widened and slowed, forming a small, quiet pool. As John approached, he felt a sudden tightening in his chest. There, partially hidden by reeds and the curve of the bank, was a young woman. She was bathing in the river, unaware of his presence. Her movements were graceful and fluid, almost like she was part of the water itself. For a moment, John felt frozen. He had heard stories over the years of fugitives and travelers passing through the plains, of those who hid from the law or from danger, but he had never encountered one himself. And yet, the reality before him was undeniable. The young woman's dark hair glistened in the sunlight, water dripping from it in thin streams. Her skin had a natural warmth, and her eyes, when they glanced toward the riverbank, were wide and alert, though she did not seem to see him. John's mind raced. He knew he should perhaps turn away, leave her in peace, and continue his routine. Yet something held him in place, a mixture of curiosity and awe. He had never seen anyone like her, so free yet so cautious, so strong yet so vulnerable. The river, usually just a place for cattle to drink, suddenly felt like a secret world, a threshold between ordinary life and something unknown. He stepped back behind a large rock, careful to remain out of sight. From there, he watched as she moved with quiet confidence, her every action deliberate and aware. The water rippled around her as she reached for a smooth stone to wash her hair. The sun reflected off the surface of the river, creating a halo of light that seemed almost magical. John could feel his heart pounding in his chest, a mix of fear, admiration, and something he could not yet name. As he observed her, he noticed the signs of urgency in her movements. She seemed cautious, frequently glancing toward the distant hills as if expecting someone or something to appear. Her careful, measured actions suggested that she was not just bathing but hiding, taking advantage of a rare moment of peace in a life that must have been filled with constant vigilance. John's curiosity deepened. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why was she alone in this vast, unforgiving land? He thought about the stories he had heard of Apache fugitives, people who were running for their lives from injustice or danger. Could she be one of them? His mind warned him to stay back, to avoid getting involved. Helping a fugitive was not just illegal, it could be dangerous. Yet, something in him resisted turning away. He felt a strange connection, an instinct that urged him to understand her story rather than report her. For the next few minutes, John remained still, watching her as the water glistened and her hair fell over her shoulders. He noticed the tension in her movements, the careful way she handled each action, as if every moment could be a matter of survival. Despite her cautiousness, there was a quiet grace about her, a dignity that spoke of strength and resilience. John felt both admiration and a deep sense of empathy. He knew what it was like to live a hard life, to face the solitude of the plains day after day, and he could see that she, too, had endured struggles he could only guess at. As the morning passed, John finally forced himself to move. He stepped back further along the riverbank, finding a higher vantage point where he could still see her without being noticed. He watched silently, taking in the beauty of the scene, not just in the woman herself, but in the way the sunlight danced on the water, the rustling of the leaves, and the gentle flow of the river. It was a rare, peaceful moment, a small fragment of life that seemed untouched by the hardships of the world. In that moment, John realized something important. Life on the ranch, with all its routines and hardships, had prepared him for this encounter in ways he could not have imagined. His eyes, trained to notice details in the land, now took in details of the human heart and spirit. The river, which had always been a simple source of water, now became a stage for a story that was unfolding before him, one filled with mystery, courage, and the quiet power of human connection. Eventually, John turned and walked slowly back toward his ranch house. His mind replayed the image of the young woman over and over, her presence lingering like a shadow that refused to fade. He could not shake the feeling that this encounter was not random, that it had meaning beyond the simple curiosity of a man walking by the river. He knew that in the days to come, he would find himself thinking of her often, wondering about her story, and questioning what choices he would make if fate brought them together again. For John, that morning marked the beginning of something new. It was the first time in years that the quiet, predictable life of the ranch had been interrupted by a mystery so vivid, so alive, that it demanded attention. The footprints in the mud were more than just signs of someone passing through. They were the first chapter of a story that would challenge his understanding of courage, compassion, and the unexpected ways life could change in a single moment. And so, as the sun climbed higher into the sky and the river sparkled in its golden light, John returned to his daily chores. Yet, in his heart, he carried the memory of the woman in the river, a memory that would not fade. It was a quiet, unspoken awareness, a sense that life, even in its simplest moments, held surprises waiting to be discovered. The plains stretched endlessly before him, but now they felt different, alive with possibilities he had never imagined, and the river flowed with more meaning than ever before. After that morning by the river, John could not stop thinking about the young woman he had seen. Her image stayed in his mind like a photograph he could not erase. Each time he walked the trails, tended to his cattle, or repaired fences, he found himself glancing toward the river, half expecting to see her again. The plains, which had always been so familiar, now seemed full of possibilities and secrets he had never noticed before. The quiet, endless horizon that once comforted him now stirred a restless curiosity he could not ignore. Days passed, and John made a careful habit of observing the river from a distance. He never approached too closely, for he knew that sudden intrusion could frighten her away. Yet from his hidden vantage points behind trees, rocks, and tall grasses, he could see her movements, each one telling a story. She was cautious but deliberate. Sometimes she bathed in the river, like the first morning he had seen her. Other times she gathered water or foraged along the bank for edible plants. He noticed the small ways she adapted to her environment, how careful she was with her movements, how alert her eyes always seemed. John realized that she was not just hiding, she was surviving. And in every careful action he saw a story of courage. She moved with skill and awareness as though the land itself had taught her how to live in it. Her presence brought a strange mix of admiration and concern to John. He admired her strength, but he also worried. The plains were harsh and dangers were never far away. Wolves and coyotes roamed at night, sudden storms could rise without warning, and the nearest town was miles away. How had she survived alone for so long, and why was she here on his land? The more John observed, the more he noticed details that human eyes often missed. He saw her hair tied carefully with strips of cloth, keeping it out of her face as she moved. Her clothes, though simple, were practical for life in the wilderness. They were worn but clean, showing that she took pride in caring for herself even in difficult circumstances. He saw the way she rested, crouched on a rock by the river, listening to the sounds of the plains as if every noise could carry a warning. He realized that she was not merely a fugitive. She was a person of intelligence and instinct, someone who had learned to survive without depending on anyone else. One morning, John noticed something new. As he approached his usual vantage point, he saw smoke rising from a small fire hidden in the trees. It was faint, almost hidden by the morning mist, but unmistakable. He crouched down and watched. The young woman had made a small camp with a fire pit surrounded by stones. Near it he could see a few scattered belongings, a bundle of clothes, a small knife, and what looked like a crude cooking pot. The sight confirmed what he had suspected. She was not passing through. She had chosen this spot for safety and secrecy. The discovery brought a mixture of excitement and unease. John knew that helping someone in her situation could be dangerous, but his curiosity, and something deeper, urged him to learn more. He began thinking carefully about his options. He could ignore her entirely, as most men would, leaving her to face the dangers alone. Or he could watch from a distance, learn her routine, and perhaps offer small, indirect help. The moral and practical questions weighed on him. He had lived a life of rules and routine, but this encounter challenged both. Over the next few days, John observed her more closely. He noticed that she had a method for finding food. She collected wild berries and roots along the riverbank, careful not to damage the plants for future use. Occasionally, he saw her fishing with a simple spear, her movements precise and practiced. He realized she must have spent years learning these skills, surviving in the wilderness on her own. The more he watched, the more he felt a deep respect for her. She was not just beautiful, she was strong, resourceful, and intelligent. One afternoon, John noticed her pause and listened carefully. The wind shifted, and he saw her eyes dart toward the distant hills. Her body tensed, and she moved quietly into the cover of some bushes, leaving only a faint outline visible. John held his breath. Something or someone must have been nearby, though he could see nothing. Her reaction showed a mixture of fear and experience. She knew the dangers of being seen. The incident reminded him that life on the plains was not easy, and that her beauty, grace, and independence were accompanied by constant vigilance. As days turned into a week, John found himself thinking about her more often than he liked to admit. He began leaving small offerings near her camp, fruit from the orchard, a bottle of water, and sometimes a small piece of cloth he had found useful. He never left them in a way that could draw attention, always making sure she could find them without knowing who had provided them. He watched from a distance as she discovered these items. Her initial surprise gave way to cautious appreciation. Though she did not speak to him, the gestures created a silent connection between them, a mutual acknowledgement of awareness and understanding. Through these small acts, John began to learn more about her character. She was wary of strangers, yet she accepted help when it did not compromise her safety. She was self-reliant, but not proud to the point of rejecting kindness. He noticed her moments of solitude, how she would sit by the river for hours, gazing into the water as if seeking answers or remembering something from her past. John wondered about her story, what had led her to become a fugitive, why she had chosen this particular stretch of river, and what fears weighed on her mind. He realized that the woman before him carried a history that was as complex and wide as the plains themselves. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, John watched her collect firewood. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, and the river shimmered in the fading light. She worked quietly, moving with care, her focus absolute. John felt a strange mix of emotions, admiration, concern, and an inexplicable connection. He had never felt this way before about a stranger. She was more than a mystery. She was a living reminder of resilience, courage, and the human spirit's capacity to survive against odds. That night John found himself restless. He lay awake in his small cabin, listening to the distant sounds of the river, thinking about the young woman. He wondered what she ate, where she slept, and how she had learned to survive so skillfully. He imagined the dangers she must have faced, the people who might have pursued her, and the courage it must have taken to travel alone across the plains. His admiration grew, tempered by worry. Life on the ranch had taught him to value hard work and perseverance, but he now realized that courage took many forms, some of them hidden and silent, like hers. Over the next few days, John became more aware of the rhythms of her life. He noticed her patterns, when she bathed in the river, when she foraged, and when she rested. He observed how she moved with care, never leaving traces of her presence that could be followed easily. He realized that she had learned the language of the land, understanding how to hide, how to blend, and how to survive. Each observation deepened his respect and also sparked a quiet sense of admiration that was difficult to describe. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, a woman shaped by survival, independence, and the beauty of living close to the land. One afternoon, a storm approached. Dark clouds rolled in quickly and strong winds whipped across the plains. John watched as she moved to find shelter under a cluster of trees. He worried that the sudden storm could put her at risk, yet he stayed hidden, observing from a distance. Lightning flashed across the sky, and the first drops of rain began to fall. She worked quickly to protect her small camp, covering her belongings and building a temporary barrier with branches. John could not help but admire her efficiency and calm under pressure. Even in danger, she remained composed, using her knowledge and experience to face the storm. As the rain poured down, John realized something important. The young woman was not only a fugitive, she was a survivor in the truest sense. Her life had forced her to become resourceful, careful, and strong. She embodied qualities that John had always valued in his work on the ranch: patience, resilience, and the ability to face challenges head-on. Yet she also carried a grace and quiet dignity that set her apart. For John, watching her was both inspiring and humbling. He understood that life on the plains could be hard, but it could also reveal the extraordinary strength of those who lived within it. By the time the storm passed, the river flowed faster, and the wind had calmed. The young woman emerged from her shelter, shaking the rain from her hair, and returned to her camp. John watched silently, recognizing that each moment he observed her added to a growing understanding of who she was and what she had endured. He knew he was crossing into dangerous territory by caring so deeply, but he could not turn away. The river, once just part of his ranch, had become a window into another life, a life of courage, determination, and survival. In the days that followed, John's admiration for her deepened. He continued to leave small offerings, careful not to reveal himself directly. He learned patience, watching her movements and gaining insight into her strength and character. Each discovery brought a sense of connection, an unspoken understanding that, despite distance and silence, their lives had touched in a meaningful way. He realized that this encounter would change him, teaching him to see life with greater awareness, empathy, and appreciation for the resilience of the human spirit. The days passed slowly for John, each one bringing a mixture of routine work and quiet observation of the young woman along the river. He continued tending his cattle, repairing fences, and walking the familiar trails, yet his thoughts often drifted toward her. He wondered where she had come from, what dangers she had faced, and why she had chosen this remote stretch of river as her temporary home. With each observation, his curiosity grew, along with a strange, unspoken connection that seemed to bind them without words. One afternoon, John noticed something that made his heart tighten. From his hidden vantage point, he saw faint signs of other people nearby. Footprints appeared along the riverbank, larger and heavier than the ones the young woman had left. They seemed to follow her trail at a cautious distance, as though someone, or multiple people, were tracking her. John felt a chill run down his spine. Danger was close, and the reality of her situation became undeniable. She was not just surviving the wilderness, she was fleeing from pursuers, and the stakes were higher than he had imagined. John faced a difficult choice. He could ignore the situation and leave her to face the threat alone, maintaining his own safety and the routine of his life. Or he could intervene in some way, risking his safety and potentially breaking the law to help a stranger. The moral question weighed heavily on him. He had always lived by the rules, valuing honesty and hard work, yet this moment challenged everything he believed about responsibility, compassion, and courage. He realized that inaction was no longer neutral. It could mean harm to someone who was already in danger. Over the next few days, John watched her more carefully than ever. He observed the young woman as she moved through the brush, searching for food, collecting water, and avoiding the footprints that occasionally appeared. Her movements were cautious, measured, and deliberate. She had a natural instinct for survival that impressed him deeply. Every action told a story of experience and resilience, of a life that had been shaped by danger and necessity. John felt both admiration and concern. He knew that if she was discovered, her life could be at risk. He also noticed moments of humanity, small glimpses that revealed her vulnerability. She would sit quietly by the river, gazing into the water as if seeking comfort or guidance. Sometimes she would cover her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling slightly, as though she were fighting an internal battle. John realized that she was carrying a heavy burden, one that went beyond physical survival. He could see the weight of fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty in her every movement. The realization made him feel protective, and his desire to help grew stronger. One evening, John decided to approach cautiously. He prepared himself mentally, knowing that sudden contact could frighten her and potentially make the situation worse. He carried a small bundle of food, a few blankets, and a bottle of water, thinking he might leave them near her camp as he had done before, but closer this time. As he walked toward the river, he kept to the shadows, moving silently and carefully. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the river reflected the colors of the setting sun, creating a peaceful contrast to the tension in his heart. When he reached a spot near her camp, he paused, waiting for the right moment. He could see her collecting firewood, her back turned toward him. John took a deep breath and placed the bundle in a nearby clearing, making sure it was visible but not too close to startle her. He stepped back, hidden among the trees, and watched. The young woman approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the surroundings as she discovered the offering. Her initial surprise gave way to careful inspection. She touched the blankets, smelled the food, and finally nodded slightly, as though acknowledging the gesture. The silent exchange brought John a sense of relief. Though she did not speak, he felt that a small bridge had been built between them, a bridge of trust, respect, and unspoken understanding. He realized that helping her in small ways was possible without directly revealing himself. The connection, fragile as it was, gave him hope that he could play a role in her survival without endangering either of them unnecessarily. But the danger was never far away. A few days later, John noticed signs that the pursuers were closer than ever. He saw smoke rising from a distant ridge, and the footprints along the riverbank grew more frequent and deeper. The young woman moved with increased urgency, gathering her few belongings and preparing to relocate. John's heart pounded as he realized that her safety depended on careful timing, quick thinking, and perhaps his willingness to take risks. He understood that inaction was no longer an option. John began thinking strategically. He studied the terrain, noting the hidden paths, dense brush, and rocky outcrops that could provide cover. He considered ways to help her move safely, to create diversions, or to guide her to areas less likely to be discovered. Each plan required caution, intelligence, and patience. He knew that one wrong move could jeopardize everything. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but he also felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. The routine life of the ranch now seemed incomplete without the challenge of protecting someone in need. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, John spotted her preparing to move along the riverbank. She carried her small bundle with care, scanning the terrain for threats. He watched her, realizing that this might be the most dangerous part of her journey yet. He knew that she would need guidance and support, even if he remained unseen. The idea of intervening directly crossed his mind, but he hesitated. Trust was fragile, and any sudden action could frighten her, putting her at greater risk. He decided to remain hidden, ready to act only if the danger became immediate. Hours passed, and the young woman moved cautiously through the brush. John followed at a distance, using his knowledge of the land to remain undetected. He noticed her careful steps, her pauses to listen, and the way she adjusted her path to avoid open areas. Each observation deepened his respect for her skill and resilience. He realized that her life had been shaped by necessity, and that she had learned to survive in ways that many could not imagine. The combination of fear, intelligence, and determination created a quiet strength that both inspired and humbled him. Later that day, John saw her encounter a small obstacle, a fallen tree blocking her path. She paused, assessing the situation, then carefully climbed over the trunk, keeping her balance and minimizing noise. John felt a surge of admiration. Every action, no matter how small, demonstrated her resourcefulness and determination. He knew that life had not been easy for her, and yet she faced each challenge with courage and skill. The sight strengthened his resolve to help her in whatever way he could, even if it meant putting himself at risk. As evening approached, John watched her settle near a hidden bend in the river. She arranged a small fire, using the skills he had observed over the past days. He remained hidden, content to see her safe for the moment. The flames flickered in the fading light, casting a warm glow on her features. John felt a mixture of relief, admiration, and concern. He knew that the danger had not passed and that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Yet in that quiet moment, he also felt a sense of hope, a hope that careful planning, observation, and patience could help her survive and perhaps even build a fragile trust between them. That night, John lay awake in his cabin, thinking about the events of the day. He considered the risks, the responsibilities, and the moral questions that had been weighing on him. He knew that helping a fugitive was not a simple matter. It carried legal and personal risks. Yet he could not ignore the human element, the young woman's courage, vulnerability, and determination. He realized that life often presented choices that were not easy, and that doing what was right sometimes required courage beyond physical strength. Over the next few days, John continued his careful observations. He noted her routines, her strategies for avoiding detection, and the small ways she adapted to the environment. Each observation provided insight into her character and her situation. He also began to reflect on his own life, the quiet routines, the solitude, and the predictability of ranch life. In comparison, her life, though dangerous, was vivid, immediate, and full of challenges that required intelligence and courage. The contrast made him reflect on his own strengths and weaknesses, and on the nature of courage itself. One afternoon, John noticed movement in the distance, figures moving along the ridge, closer than before. His heart raced. The young woman, unaware of the approaching danger, continued her routine. John realized that immediate action might be necessary to protect her. He considered signaling her, creating a diversion, or using his knowledge of the terrain to mislead the pursuers. The situation was tense, and the margin for error was small. For the first time, John felt the full weight of responsibility, not just for his own safety, but for the life of someone he had come to care about from afar. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, John made his decision. He would act, but carefully. He moved quietly through the brush, planning to create a distraction that would allow her to move safely. His mind raced with possibilities, weighing risk against necessity. Every step required focus and precision, but he felt a determination that he had never known before. The young woman's life depended on his actions, and he knew that courage was not just about physical strength, but about careful thinking, patience, and the willingness to take responsibility for another human being. The following morning, the plains were bathed in a soft, golden light as the sun began to rise. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of earth and river water. John had not slept much the night before. His mind had been alive with plans and concerns for the young woman. He knew that today might require action, and yet he feared making a mistake that could put her in danger. Despite his careful planning, a knot of tension remained in his chest, a constant reminder that every choice he made now carried consequences far beyond his own life. As he walked along the familiar trails near the river, John spotted her first. She was moving quietly, gathering firewood and scanning the terrain with sharp, alert eyes. Her posture was cautious but calm, and she carried herself with a quiet strength that never failed to impress him. For a long moment, John simply watched, hidden behind a grove of trees. He felt a mixture of admiration, concern, and something deeper, a connection he could not yet define. Each small movement she made seemed deliberate, as though she was aware of every detail in her surroundings, every possible danger, and every chance of survival. John realized that if he wanted to help her, he would need to reveal himself carefully. He could no longer rely solely on small, hidden gestures. The danger of pursuers was growing closer, and the young woman's path would soon cross with theirs unless he intervened. Taking a deep breath, John stepped out from behind the trees, making sure his movements were slow and deliberate. He carried a small bundle of food, a few blankets, and a jug of water, all intended as a gesture of trust rather than control. The young woman froze the moment she saw him. Her dark eyes widened, and her hands instinctively clutched the edges of her clothing. For a few tense seconds, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the gentle flow of the river and the rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. John held his hands slightly raised, a silent gesture of peace. "I'm not here to harm you," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. "I just want to help." Her gaze flicked toward the bundle he carried. Carefully, she stepped back a few paces, keeping herself between him and the river. John did not move closer. Instead, He lowered the bundle to the ground and stepped aside, giving her room to approach it if she wished. He watched as she studied the items carefully, suspicion and caution clear in her movements. Slowly, she picked up the blankets, examining them before setting them down and reaching for the food. The action was deliberate, as though she were testing whether she could trust him. John remained silent, allowing her to take her time. In that quiet moment, he noticed the strength and intelligence in her eyes, the awareness that had kept her alive in the wilderness for so long. He realized that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned slowly, patiently, and with care. For the first time, he understood that his own courage would be measured not by actions alone, but by his ability to respect her autonomy, her choices, and her right to protect herself. After a few moments, she finally glanced up at him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, her voice steady but wary. John considered his answer carefully. "Because you need it," he said simply, "and because I believe it's the right thing to do. No one should have to face danger alone if I can help in some way." Her eyes searched his face, measuring the sincerity in his words. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his honesty and intent. Over the next few days, John and the young woman began to establish a fragile routine. He remained careful not to impose, providing supplies and guidance from a respectful distance. She continued to move through the terrain with skill and caution, yet she accepted his assistance in small, deliberate ways. Occasionally, they exchanged words, brief, simple phrases that carried meaning without unnecessary detail. The silence between them became a form of communication, a space where trust could grow without words. One afternoon, John observed her attempting to cross a particularly rocky section of the river. The current was stronger than usual, and the stones were slippery from recent rains. He watched closely, ready to intervene if necessary. She moved with careful precision, placing each foot deliberately and testing the stability of each stone. At one point, a small rock shifted under her weight and she paused, balancing herself with a long branch she had picked up. John's heart pounded as he witnessed the scene. He admired her skill, but he also realized the danger she faced. If she fell, she could be seriously hurt. Without thinking, he stepped closer, calling out softly, "Use the branch here, it will help you." His voice was calm, non-threatening, and gentle. She looked toward him, hesitation clear in her eyes. After a long moment, she nodded and adjusted her position, using the branch as he had suggested. Carefully, she crossed the river, and when she reached the far side, she allowed herself a small, relieved smile. John exhaled quietly, feeling a sense of accomplishment that was neither pride nor ownership, but simply the satisfaction of helping someone survive. As the days turned into weeks, the young woman began to share small fragments of her story. She spoke of her home, the dangers she had faced, and the reasons she had fled. John listened patiently, offering words of understanding rather than judgment. He realized that her life had been shaped by challenges he could scarcely imagine. Yet in sharing these moments, a bond began to form. The connection was not rooted in romance or possession, but in mutual respect, empathy, and the recognition of strength in one another. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, John and the young woman sat by the river, watching the water reflect the orange and purple hues of the sky. They had spent the day gathering supplies, reinforcing her temporary camp, and navigating the difficult terrain. For the first time, they spoke without fear or caution, simply sharing thoughts about the day, the land, and the small comforts they had found in their routines. In that quiet moment, John realized that trust was no longer fragile. It had begun to grow, carefully and slowly, like a seed taking root in fertile soil. The young woman looked at him and asked, "Why do you stay?" John considered the question. "Because I can," he replied simply. "Because I know what it feels like to be alone, and I don't want you to be alone. Not like that." She nodded slowly, understanding the meaning behind his words. Though they were few, the words carried weight, a recognition of shared humanity and the quiet courage it took to survive in a world that could be both beautiful and dangerous. Over the next several days, their bond strengthened through shared experiences. John continued to observe her carefully, providing support when necessary, but always respecting her independence. He admired the way she moved through the land with intelligence and skill, the way she faced danger with courage, and the quiet determination that allowed her to survive despite fear, uncertainty, and the constant threat of pursuers. In turn, the young woman began to rely on him in small, careful ways, recognizing his presence as a source of stability and support rather than a threat. One morning, John noticed that she seemed more relaxed than ever before. She moved with a confidence that had been tempered by caution, yet she allowed herself small moments of ease, pausing to rest by the river, smiling faintly at a bird in flight, or speaking freely with John about her observations of the land. He realized that trust, once earned, could transform fear into a shared sense of security. For the first time, he felt that their connection had become something more than necessity. It had become a quiet, mutual understanding that neither had expected but both needed. As the sun set that evening, John reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the moment he first saw her bathing in the river, their lives had been intertwined in ways neither could have predicted. What had begun as curiosity and cautious observation had evolved into trust, empathy, and a shared recognition of human resilience. The young woman had taught him lessons about courage, survival, and the strength that could exist in quiet determination. In turn, he had offered her support, protection, and the possibility of a safe haven, even in a world filled with danger. The bond between them remained unspoken but powerful. Words were not always necessary to convey understanding, and actions spoke more than promises ever could. John knew that their connection was fragile, still subject to the challenges of the wilderness and the threats that lingered nearby. Yet he also understood that trust, once nurtured, could provide strength, hope, and a sense of shared humanity that transcended fear and circumstance. In the days that followed, John and the young woman continued their careful routines, each aware of the other's presence and each learning from the experience of living closely with danger and trust. They moved through the land with a shared awareness, observing, listening, and respecting the rhythms of the plains. Every day brought small victories, a safe crossing, a successful meal, or a quiet moment of reflection by the river. Each moment reinforced the bond that had begun to form, a bond rooted in respect, courage, and the recognition of shared humanity. By the end of the week, John realized that their lives had changed in ways neither of them could have predicted. What had begun as a chance encounter had grown into something meaningful, a fragile but powerful connection that bridged the gap between caution and trust, fear and courage, solitude and companionship. He understood that the young woman's presence had awakened something in him, a deeper awareness of empathy, responsibility, and the quiet strength that could arise when two people respected and supported one another in the face of adversity. The days grew shorter, and the first hints of autumn touched the plains. The air carried a crispness that reminded John of how quickly time moved, even in the quiet, slow rhythms of ranch life. He and the young woman had settled into a careful routine over the past weeks. Trust had grown between them, a quiet bond that needed no words to express. Yet John knew that their fragile peace could not last forever. Danger still lingered nearby, and the reality of her situation demanded that they act with caution and purpose. John spent the morning walking along the trails near the river, thinking through the safest plan for her. He had studied the terrain, memorized hidden paths, and considered every possible route that would keep her out of sight of any pursuers. His own life, once governed by predictable routines, now revolved around ensuring her safety. Every step he took was measured, every decision weighed carefully. He realized that helping her escape the dangers she faced would require not just courage, but patience, strategy, and complete awareness of their surroundings. When he returned to the river, he found her quietly gathering water. Her movements were steady, precise, and careful, but John noticed a small tension in her shoulders. She had sensed the closeness of danger, and her body reflected the constant vigilance that had become part of her life. John approached slowly, keeping his voice soft. "We need to plan your journey," he said. She looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting both curiosity and caution. She nodded silently, understanding that the time for careful observation had passed. Now, action was necessary. They spent the morning preparing. John gathered supplies, food, blankets, and water, along with a small bundle of tools he thought might help her along the way. The young woman arranged her belongings with careful precision, checking each item to ensure it would not slow her down or draw attention. Every movement demonstrated her skill and experience, the same qualities John had admired from the first day he saw her by the river. Together they prepared for the journey ahead, a delicate balance of trust, planning, and quiet determination. Before they set out, John took a moment to observe her. The young woman had always carried herself with quiet strength, but now there was a subtle light in her eyes, a combination of hope and resolve. He realized that she had begun to trust him fully, something he had not taken for granted. The weeks of careful observation, small gestures of support, and patient understanding had created a bond that neither of them could easily define, but both understood. It was a connection forged through adversity, respect, and the shared awareness of the dangers they faced. The journey began at dawn. The plains were bathed in soft light, and the river shimmered like liquid gold. John and the young woman moved quietly along a hidden path he had discovered weeks before. They kept to the shadows, avoiding open areas, and listened carefully for any signs of pursuers. Every step was deliberate, measured, and filled with purpose. John felt the weight of responsibility, but also a sense of clarity. He understood that courage was not only about facing danger, but also about guiding and protecting someone in need. As they moved, John noticed the way the young woman adapted to the terrain with skill and precision. She crossed small streams with care, leaped over fallen logs without hesitation, and moved with a quiet awareness that left no trace behind. He marveled at her resilience and determination, recognizing the immense challenges she had faced to survive on her own. At the same time, he realized that his presence provided her with a measure of security, a silent assurance that someone was watching over her, ready to intervene if danger arose. Midway through their journey, they reached a dense section of brush that marked a natural barrier between the open plains and the hills beyond. John paused, studying the path ahead. He knew that this part of the journey would be the most difficult. The terrain was rough, uneven, and unfamiliar, but it offered cover and reduced the chances of being seen by anyone tracking her. The young woman looked at him, reading his expression and understanding his concern. Together they navigated the thickets, moving slowly but efficiently, communicating through gestures and brief, whispered words. As they climbed higher into the hills, the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the landscape. John noticed the look of determination on her face, a quiet strength that had carried her this far. He felt a deep respect for her courage, resilience, and intelligence. At the same time, he understood the fragility of their situation. One misstep could expose them, undoing weeks of careful planning. Yet he also knew that trust had been established between them, and that this mutual understanding would guide them safely through the most difficult parts of the journey. At midday, they paused by a small spring hidden among the rocks. The young woman knelt to drink, her movements calm and deliberate, while John unpacked the supplies they had carried. They shared a simple meal in silence, each aware of the other's presence and needs. In that quiet moment, the bond between them felt stronger than ever. Words were not necessary. Their actions, careful planning, and shared experiences spoke volumes. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown together, and this shared experience had created a trust that could not be easily broken. After resting, they continued their journey. The hills grew steeper and the path narrower, but the young woman moved with confidence and skill. John followed closely, offering guidance when necessary, but allowing her independence and agency to remain intact. He admired her self-reliance, recognizing that her survival had depended on her ability to trust her instincts and make decisions under pressure. At the same time, he realized that his presence provided a measure of support that allowed her to take calculated risks without unnecessary fear. As evening approached, they reached a secluded valley that John had scouted earlier. It was hidden from view, surrounded by thick brush and rocky ridges. Here, they would rest for the night, safe from prying eyes and the dangers of the plains. The young woman set up a small fire, using her skills to build it efficiently and safely. John watched, silently impressed by her expertise and the care she took to ensure their safety. The firelight reflected in her eyes, and John felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She was safe, for now, and they had navigated the most dangerous parts of the journey together. During the night, they talked quietly about the days ahead. John shared his knowledge of the surrounding areas, pointing out paths, water sources, and safe places to rest. The young woman listened intently, absorbing the information and asking questions when necessary. Their conversation was practical, focused on survival, but it also carried a subtle sense of trust and connection. Each shared insight, each careful plan, reinforced the bond that had grown between them over weeks of observation, care, and mutual respect. The next morning, they set out again, moving with purpose and caution. The young woman followed John's guidance, trusting his knowledge of the land while relying on her own skills and instincts. Together, they navigated hills, streams, and valleys, always aware of the need to remain unseen. The journey was challenging, but their combined effort, patience, and understanding allowed them to progress steadily and safely. Each step brought them closer to a place where she could finally find refuge, free from the dangers that had pursued her for so long. Finally, after several days of careful travel, they reached a remote settlement far from the river and the plains John had called home. It was a small community, hidden from the main roads, where the young woman could find safety and start to rebuild her life. John watched as she approached the settlement, her posture still cautious but her expression lighter, filled with hope and relief. He felt a mixture of pride, satisfaction, and quiet sorrow. He had helped her reach safety, but the journey together had to end here. Before she entered the settlement, she turned to John. Her eyes held a depth of emotion he could not fully read, gratitude, trust, and something unspoken that went beyond words. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with feeling. John nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Be safe," he replied. "And remember, you are stronger than you think." She gave a small smile and nodded, then walked toward the settlement, disappearing from view but leaving a lasting impression on him. As John watched her disappear into the distance, he felt a quiet sense of closure and fulfillment. The weeks of observation, care, and careful planning had culminated in this moment. He had helped someone survive, protected her from danger, and forged a bond that had changed him as much as it had helped her. The plains around him, once familiar and predictable, now felt alive with the memory of their shared journey. The river, the hills, and the quiet trails held the story of courage, trust, and human connection that would remain with him forever. Returning to his ranch, John found a renewed appreciation for the life he had always known. The routines, the solitude, and the hard work of ranch life now carried a deeper meaning. He had learned that courage could take many forms, quiet, patient, and deliberate. He had discovered the power of trust and empathy, and he had witnessed the resilience of the human spirit in someone who had faced unimaginable challenges. His life on the plains would continue, but it would never be quite the same. In the weeks and months that followed, John often walked along the river, remembering the young woman who had changed everything. He thought of her courage, her skill, and the quiet dignity with which she faced life's dangers. Though their paths had diverged, the memory of their journey remained vivid. It reminded him that even in a quiet, predictable life, unexpected encounters could teach lessons about courage, resilience, and the power of human connection. The plains, the river, and the hills carried their story silently, a testament to the ways life could surprise, challenge, and ultimately inspire those who were willing to notice. John knew that she had found safety and a chance to rebuild her life, and that knowledge brought him peace. He continued his work on the ranch, tending to the land, caring for the cattle, and walking the familiar trails. Yet in every step, in every glance toward the river, he felt the lingering presence of a story that had begun with a chance encounter, grown through trust, and culminated in courage. The young woman's journey had intersected with his, leaving a mark on both of their lives that would never fade, a quiet reminder of the beauty, strength, and resilience that exists in the human spirit.